In the summer of 1999, two sisters vanished from their grandparents' locked cottage. No forced entry, no screams, just an empty room and a chilling note about knocking on the window. Someone had been watching them, and whoever, or whatever it was, knew exactly where to strike and how to disappear without a trace. But 13 years later, a wall gave up its secret, a diary buried behind drywall, and one final message that shattered the silence. What investigators found next brought the case to its haunting conclusion and proved that even the quietest evil leaves behind echoes. The sun had just begun to rise above the dense tree line of the northern Michigan woods when the first signs of something wrong began to take root. It was Monday, June 14th, 1999. At 6:37 a.m., the temperature in Crawford County hovered around 54 degrees, with light dew clinging to the grass and no wind to disturb the eerie stillness that blanketed the landscape. The closest GPS coordinates to the incident, 44.6819 degrees N, 84.7124 degrees W, marked the remote lakefront cottage where sisters Amanda, 15, and Rachel, 13, Whitaker, had been spending their summer with their grandparents. The cottage, a creaking two-bedroom structure built in 1957, stood on 5 acres of forested land, with only a gravel road connecting it to the nearest town, Grayling, a full 12 miles away. The girls had arrived a week earlier, having been dropped off by their father, Mark Whitaker, a truck mechanic from Grand Rapids. Their mother had passed away in 1995. Summer breaks with their grandparents had become tradition ever since. According to their grandfather, Harold Delaney, everything appeared normal the night before. The girls played Scrabble after dinner, then watched a VHS copy of The Secret Garden. Around 9:30 p.m., they both went to bed in the shared back bedroom, a space with wood panel walls, twin beds, and a single window that looked out onto the woods. The house was locked. The dog didn't bark. There were no strange sounds. But by 6:15 a.m., when their grandmother Marion knocked on their door to call them for breakfast, the beds were empty. The sheets were turned down as if they'd gotten up quietly. Their suitcases were untouched. Their shoes, still lined neatly at the foot of each bed, remained behind. The only thing missing was Amanda's gray windbreaker, last seen hanging by the front door. At 6:29 a.m., Harold placed the first call to 911 from their landline. Harold Delaney. Yes, this is Harold Delaney. My granddaughters, Amanda and Rachel Whitaker. We can't find them. They were here last night. Their beds. They're made, but they're gone. There's no sign of them. Nothing. Dispatcher. Sir, can you confirm your address? Harold Delaney. It's 1087 Pine Ridge Road, about 12 miles east of Grayling. We're at the lake cottage. Please just send someone. This isn't like them. The Crawford County Sheriff's Department responded at 6:56 a.m., arriving with 2 deputies. There were no signs of forced entry. The front and back doors were still locked from the inside. The windows had not been tampered with. There were no broken screens or torn curtains. The girls' room was undisturbed. Nothing in the house appeared stolen or even touched. One deputy noted that the grass under the girls' window appeared to be flattened in 2 parallel lines, as if someone had knelt or stood there for a long period. But there were no shoe prints, no drag marks. The soil was too dry. By 8:00 a.m., a grid search had been initiated across the immediate 3 acres surrounding the property. Officers, neighbors, and later volunteers fanned out through the woods, calling the girls' names. Boats were deployed on Lake Houghton by 10:12 a.m. to sweep the shoreline. Divers were not yet brought in, as there was still no evidence to suggest the girls had entered the water. Back at the cottage, officers reviewed the phone log. No outgoing or incoming calls had been placed after 7:12 p.m. the previous night. Amanda had called her father just to tell him they were bored but fine. The lack of struggle, the undisturbed room, and the missing windbreaker all suggested something chilling. Either the girls had left willingly, or they had been lured, quietly, precisely, and with enough care not to disturb the house or the dog. One strange detail stood out. Marion told the deputy that Amanda had complained twice that week about hearing tapping at the bedroom window at night. They had dismissed it as branches, or perhaps an animal. Marion now recalled Amanda whispering just the night before. It happened again, Nana. That same knocking. 3 times. Like before. The knocking. The missing windbreaker. 2 girls gone in the night without a trace. By noon, the story would reach the local radio station. By sunset, the FBI would be called. But in that quiet cottage, with its beds made and its silence intact, one fact settled in the minds of investigators. Whatever had happened had occurred quickly, quietly, and with clinical precision. And someone, or something, had known exactly how not to leave a trace. By the time the sun rose fully over Lake Houghton on that Monday morning, local authorities were already coordinating what would become the most intense missing persons effort in Crawford County's history. At 8:45 a.m., Sheriff Douglas Neal formally expanded the response, converting the case from possible runaways to critical missing juveniles. That status triggered a statewide bulletin and enlisted the Michigan State Police. By 9:03 a.m., a command center had been established in a canvas tent beside the cottage. Deputies from 3 nearby counties arrived to support. At 9:44 a.m., a second 911 call came in, this time from the east side of the lake. Caller: "Hi, I'm not sure if this means anything, but I heard screaming last night. Around maybe 2 a.m.? Thought it was kids messing around. It was real quick. But now I'm hearing about those girls." Dispatcher: "Can you describe what you heard?" Caller: "Just 2 short screams, then nothing. I didn't see anything. It came from the woods behind our cabin. Figured it was animals. You think it was those girls?" The address logged was 1123 Lake Echo Trail, 1.7 miles northeast from the Whitaker cottage, deep within the woods but close enough to raise concern. Deputies were dispatched. No evidence was recovered. No clothing, no footprints, no disturbance. Just pine needles, damp soil, and silence. By midday, a 1.5-mile radius had been designated as the primary search grid. Marked by orange flagging tape and divided into 16 sectors, each was assigned to a mix of deputies, K-9 teams, and later, volunteer searchers from local fire departments. The dogs, trained in scent tracking, hit on several trails that led toward the lake, but all signs were lost at the water's edge. At 3:15 p.m., thermal imaging support was requested from the state. The nearest available unit, a Bell 206 helicopter equipped with FLIR, forward-looking infrared radar, was grounded due to mechanical issues and wouldn't arrive until morning. That delay would haunt investigators for years. Meanwhile, Harold and Marion Delaney were transported to the sheriff's office for formal interviews. Marion, already trembling and pale, recalled another small but disturbing moment. A few nights earlier, Amanda had drawn the bedroom curtains shut, whispering to her sister, "He was out there again." The statement chilled the room. Rachel's diary was not found among her belongings, but Amanda's sketch pad, something she carried everywhere, was recovered beneath her bed. It was flipped open to a page where she had written in ballpoint pen, "I keep dreaming about the woods, about someone standing just behind the trees, watching us. I think it's real." Investigators took the page for analysis, along with hair strands found in both pillowcases and trace soil residue on the windowsill, a surface Amanda had often leaned against. Lab analysis would take days. A neighbor, 78-year-old Helen Kessler, told deputies that her dog, Cooper, had barked aggressively 2 nights in a row, focused toward the tree line behind her cabin. "He's usually calm," she said, "but he growled, hackles up. That's not normal." Meanwhile, officers continued combing the area, this time by foot and ATV. They found something, a torn piece of pink fabric snagged on a low branch, roughly 400 yards south of the property. It matched the material of Rachel's pajama top, but without confirmation, it remained only circumstantial. At 6:02 p.m., a full 12 hours after the girls were discovered missing, Sheriff Neal gave a press statement from the tent beside the cottage. "We are treating this as an active missing persons case. At this time, we have no evidence of abduction, but we are not ruling anything out. We ask anyone in the area who may have seen or heard anything unusual to come forward." Inside the command tent, maps were redrawn. Sector grids extended to a full 3-mile radius, but still, there was no trace, no clothing, no footprints, no ransom call, no sign of predators, human or animal. Nightfall came early in the forest. Searchers returned to base at 9:40 p.m., faces exhausted, eyes lowered. The lake was still. The air was warm and windless. Some investigators refused to leave, walking quietly along the shoreline with flashlights, hoping for a glint, a sound, a sign, anything. But the woods kept their secrets, and Amanda and Rachel were still gone. Call to action. If you were their parent, would you stop searching? Comment, hope, if you'd never give up. By dawn of June 15th, the second day since Amanda and Rachel Whitaker vanished, the tone of the investigation had shifted dramatically, from hope to urgency. At 7 to 12 a.m., the FLIR-equipped Bell 206 helicopter from the Michigan State Police finally arrived, circling low over the forest canopy and the eastern edge of Lake Houghton. Inside the chopper, Trooper Lena Carmichael toggled the controls on the forward-looking infrared camera, sweeping the dense tree line for any signs of heat signature. The temperature on the ground was now 57 degrees Celsius, and the early morning humidity cast a blur over the screen. Nothing stood out. No movement, no contrast spikes. Just the long, uninterrupted cold of the woods. Back on the ground, the command post had tripled in size overnight. Mobile trailers arrived. Temporary fencing was erected to restrict media. State-level search coordinators began plotting a wider radius, 5 miles in all directions. Even seasonal cabins and fishing shacks were being canvassed. By 10:20 a.m., over 120 volunteers had registered for coordinated searches. Among them were Boy Scout troops from nearby Grayling, several volunteer firefighters, and a retired game warden who brought his own bloodhound named Sadie. Every participant was assigned a sector and checked in and out by name, badge number, and timestamp. At 12:36 p.m., Sector G4 reported something. A child's footprint in the mud near an old game trail, 2.3 miles southeast of the Whitaker cottage. Investigators from MSP's forensic unit were flown in to photograph, cast, and measure it. The print measured 8.5 inches long, consistent with Amanda's shoe size. But just 10 feet away, the trail ended. No matching prints, no heel drag, no second set belonging to Rachel. As if one girl had walked, or been carried, then disappeared again into the trees. While officials combed the forest, another line of inquiry was unfolding, one more psychological than physical. A profiler from the FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment CARD team had flown in from Quantico and was now reviewing interviews with the grandparents. "There's something off here," she said during a closed session at 2:10 p.m. "Amanda's writings point to a perceived stalker. The knocking, the drawings. This isn't a spontaneous abduction. Someone had likely been watching them, maybe for days, maybe longer." At 3:32 p.m., the local NBC affiliate, WillX, aired a brief segment during its afternoon news. Authorities continue to search the thick woods outside Grayling for 2 missing sisters who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Amanda and Rachel Whitaker were last seen at their grandparents' lakefront cottage. Authorities urge anyone with information to contact Crawford County Dispatch. No suspects have been named. The broadcast triggered a flood of calls, most false leads. A woman in Traverse City thought she saw 2 girls resembling Amanda and Rachel at a gas station. Another tip claimed to have seen a pair of teens getting into a dark blue pickup truck with rusted fenders. Yet both sightings were unverified. More disturbing was a call at 5:11 p.m. from a man identifying himself only as Caleb. He refused to give a last name but said, "You're looking in the wrong place. They're not in the woods. They were taken by someone who's been there before. He knocks first." When pressed for more, the caller hung up. The number traced back to a payphone in East Lansing, over 120 miles away. That night, officers revisited the site where the pajama fabric had been found. This time, they brought a cadaver dog. The animal paused several times along the same path but did not alert, a sign that, if the girls had been there, they hadn't died there. One final twist came at 9:03 p.m., just before the search wrapped for the day. A volunteer firefighter, 34-year-old Danny Winslow, noticed scratch marks on the underside of a wooden trail signpost, 1.8 miles northeast of the cabin. 3 vertical lines, about half an inch long each, fresh, not animal-made. Investigators took photos and logged it as evidence, but said little. Still, behind closed doors, some began to ask, could that be a signal? Or a countdown? The forest had grown darker, the air colder, and the girls were still missing. By June 16, 1999, just 48 hours after Amanda and Rachel's disappearance, the wooded quiet of Crawford County had been overtaken by news vans, satellite trucks, and a growing crowd of reporters. The first national crew from Court TV set up outside the command post at 6:45 a.m. By midday, The story had broken on CNN headline news. The shift in tone was palpable. What began as a local emergency had morphed into a national curiosity. The mystery of two sisters who'd vanished without a trace from a locked home in the woods. Sheriff Douglas Neal, now visibly exhausted and flanked by state officers, gave a press conference at 11:02 a.m., attempting to hold back speculation. "We ask the public and media to refrain from sharing unverified theories. This is an active investigation. Our focus remains on evidence, not speculation." But speculation was already outpacing evidence. A rumor had begun circulating, pushed by a tabloid-style segment on a regional morning show, that the family had a dark secret. The reporter cited an anonymous source close to the investigation, claiming Amanda had run away before, which was entirely false. Amanda had no prior record of leaving home. Her school attendance was consistent. Her teachers described her as focused, introverted, and artistically gifted. Rachel, younger and more outgoing, was the shadow that danced around Amanda's silence, as one teacher put it. Still, the story sparked a new flood of tips, over 87 in a single afternoon. At 1:23 p.m., an especially persistent caller claimed he'd picked up the girls while hitchhiking on M72. "They looked scared," he said. "Wouldn't tell me their names. I dropped them near Higgins Lake." When pressed for details, he gave shifting descriptions. His statement eventually collapsed under its own contradictions, including the claim that one girl had fiery red hair. Neither sister had red hair, but not all false leads were harmless. At 3:45 p.m., a woman named Darlene Piper entered the sheriff's station, demanding to speak to detectives. She wore a faded green poncho and had a folder of clippings about past missing persons cases, John Benet Ramsey, the Springfield Three, and several others. "I know who took them," she said. "It's the Watcher. I saw him once, in a mirror." Her testimony was erratic, filled with numerology references and drawings of eyes. Deputies quickly deemed her unreliable. Still, per protocol, her statements were documented. Darlene insisted that the number 3 was significant. 3 knocks, 3 lines on the post. You're looking for the wrong pair. Investigators quietly noted that she mentioned the scratch marks, a detail not yet released to the public. Either she had overheard officers at the search site, or someone had talked. Back at the cottage, analysts continued combing the girls' room for new details. At 6:04 p.m., a technician rescanning the baseboard along the window frame noticed a single scratch, narrow and deep, as if made by a blade. It pointed diagonally downward, toward the floor vent. Inside that vent, beneath a layer of dust, he found a small sheet of torn notepaper, folded twice. The handwriting was unmistakably Amanda's. "I don't think it's a dream. Rachel says it knocks when I'm asleep, but last night, I was awake." The note was bagged, sealed, and photographed. The paper was standard college-ruled, but water-stained in one corner, as if it had been handled with damp fingers. Later that evening, a journalist from Detroit, Mallory Keene, aired a segment claiming Amanda's diary had been burned by police. This was completely false. The diary didn't exist. Rachel's diary hadn't been found at all. Amanda's sketchpad and the note were preserved. Still, the media drumbeat continued. One headline read, "Cabin of Shadows. What happened to the Whitaker sisters?" The sheriff's department was inundated with over 300 calls that night alone. Each had to be logged, screened, and assessed. Investigators, some going on 40 hours without sleep, grew frustrated. The signal-to-noise ratio was collapsing. At 9:18 p.m., a cruiser radioed in from Sector H2. 2 volunteers had discovered what appeared to be drag marks on a steep slope near the lake's southern inlet. They ran roughly 12 feet and ended at a boulder. No blood, no fibers, no clothing. But resting on the rock was a damp Band-Aid, peeled and folded, with what looked like faint traces of blood. It was taken in for testing, and once again, the forest swallowed the evidence whole. By the time the first anniversary arrived, the makeshift command post had long been dismantled. The orange flagging tape was gone, the search grids erased. All that remained was a rusted sign at the trailhead and a locked evidence cabinet deep inside the Crawford County Courthouse. The file number was typed in faded ink, -99, 621, Amanda and Rachel Whitaker, status, inactive missing, pending lead. For Mark Whitaker, the term inactive felt like betrayal. His daughters were not pending. They were gone, and no one seemed to be looking anymore. On June 14, 2000, exactly 1 year to the day, a quiet memorial was held at the northern dock of Lake Houghton. 36 people came, family, old classmates, neighbors, and 3 deputies who had worked the original grid search. Mark stood at the edge of the lake in a plain black coat, gripping 2 sunflowers, Amanda's favorite. One by one, those gathered placed candles along the railing, and Amanda's old choir teacher recited Psalm 139. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Someone left Rachel's stuffed bear, Nibbles, by the trail post where the 3 scratch marks had been found. It was soaked in rain by nightfall, slowly collapsing into the mud. The media didn't show up. They had moved on to the next missing child. Not until 2002 did the case flicker briefly back into public view. That spring, 2 teenage girls vanished from different parts of rural Michigan within 6 weeks, Brianna Dent from Alpena and Elise Strom from Manistee. The media speculated wildly. Cable networks floated theories of a pattern. Young girls, wooded areas, summer months. Court TV ran a 2-hour special, The Vanishing Trail, Michigan's Missing Daughters. Amanda and Rachel were the opening case. Brief, haunting reenactments, a flickering lamp, the tapping on glass, the empty beds, reintroduced them to a national audience. But no direct connections were found. DNA and timelines ruled out a serial link. Still, renewed attention brought in 213 new tips. Everyone logged, and nearly all dismissed. An inmate in Ohio claimed he'd seen them alive. A woman in Oregon swore her new neighbors resembled grown-up versions of Amanda and Rachel. A trucker turned in a cassette tape with muffled voices. It was proven to be a recording of a local talk show. That same year, Sheriff Douglas Neal filed for retirement. Before he left office, he packed 2 weathered boxes from the evidence room and drove them personally to the county archive. The boxes were labeled Box A, Personal Effects, Whitaker. Box B, Scene Materials, Whitaker Cabin. Inside were Amanda's sketch pad, the handwritten note from the vent, soil samples from under the window, the Band-Aid found on the lakeside boulder, and the torn scrap of Rachel's pajama top. All still sealed, all still untouched, and all seemingly useless. In 2003, Mark Whitaker's marriage dissolved. His second wife, Dana, moved out after 4 years. In a rare televised interview, Mark admitted, "You don't move on. People say that, but it's a lie. You move sideways. You carry it in pieces." From that point forward, Mark became nomadic. He quit his job, sold his truck, and began driving across counties, appearing unannounced at police departments, libraries, even psychic fairs. He handed out worn envelopes filled with flyers, notes, and one grainy photo. Amanda and Rachel on a dock, holding popsicles, both squinting into the sun. In 2004, a documentary team from Minnesota followed Mark for 2 weeks. Their short film, Hope 421, was never broadcast, but circulated in underground forums. In one scene, Mark reads from his personal journal, "I still dream that they knock on the door. Rachel's got mud on her jeans. Amanda's got that look like she solved a riddle. I open the door and they just say, 'Dad, we were right here.'" That year, the county officially classified the case as a historical open file. It meant the case would not be closed, but no new resources would be allocated. No active team would remain assigned. It would rest, quietly, in the shadows of bureaucracy. On the girls' birthdays in 2005, Amanda turning 21, Rachel 19, Mark drove to the cottage one last time. The property had since been repossessed by the bank and was now posted for sale. The windows were boarded. The path to the lake was overgrown with nettles, but inside, remarkably, little had changed. The twin beds still stood in the back bedroom. On Amanda's nightstand, a weathered VHS copy of The Secret Garden rewound to the final scene. Dust coated the window ledge where Amanda had last stood, looking out into the trees. No one had touched the curtain rod. The scratch in the baseboard, the one pointing toward the floor vent, was still there. Rachel's diary was still missing. Later that fall, a local contractor named Darren Ellis was hired by the bank to inspect the foundation before resale. He entered the house once, stepped into the back bedroom, and immediately turned back. "The second I walked in," he told a clerk later, "I felt heavy, like something didn't want me there. I've been in hundreds of old places. This was different, like the air itself was remembering something." His comment was written off as nerves. But that same week, the agent who listed the property noticed something else. Every time she took a potential buyer near the rear bedroom, the door would swing slightly ajar, even when she'd locked it open with a wedge. She never mentioned it in the report. Back in Grand Rapids, Mark kept writing. His journal now stretched to 12 notebooks. In the margins, he circled words like knocking, window, and watching. He created timelines. He logged weather data. He printed out satellite maps and plotted every lead, no matter how thin. He mailed Christmas cards to the last known address of Amanda and Rachel every December. Just their names. No return address. No message. They were never returned, but never answered. Call to action. Do you believe time erases evidence, or just buries it deeper? Comment reopen if you think these girls still deserve answers. The letter arrived in spring. It was postmarked March the 3rd, 2012. Exactly 13 years since Amanda and Rachel Whitaker vanished from their grandparents' remote cottage near Lake Houghton. There was no return address. The envelope was plain, off-white, smeared faintly with oil along the edge. Inside, a single sheet of yellowed paper, lined, torn from a spiral notebook. 6 words, in the same crooked handwriting as the 2007 letter. "I didn't take both. She stayed." The room fell quiet when it was read aloud at the sheriff's office. The case, long archived as historical, was pulled from storage within the hour. By then, Sheriff Stephen Greeley had grown used to dead ends. But this felt different. There was a precision to it, a tone not of confession, but of instruction. Within 72 hours, investigators received permission to re-enter the property. The cottage had recently been purchased by a family from Traverse City, but the renovation hadn't begun yet. The house stood exactly as it had for years: boarded windows, dust-choked vents, and those 2 twin beds still pressed against the rear wall like shrines. This time, they brought a structural specialist and a forensic anthropologist. At 2:42 p.m. on March 6th, a contractor named Miguel Santos began tapping gently along the walls of the girls' bedroom. On the east side, the one with the only south-facing window, his hammer hit a patch that didn't echo right, hollow. Someone had rebuilt that section decades ago, but there were no work permits, no record of changes. They marked the area, 4 feet wide, roughly shoulder height. At 3:19 p.m., they began removing the panel. Behind the drywall was old insulation, shredded, dusty, and pressed flat as if by weight. Then, an opening, a narrow cavity no wider than 12 inches. There, resting atop the studs, they saw it. A diary bound in red vinyl, the first real evidence since 1999. It belonged to Amanda. Inside were dozens of pages. Some entries dated back to spring, others just days before the girls vanished. But one stood out, the final entry. It was written in thick pen, the letters hurried, phrases underlined. "The knocking is getting louder. I thought it was animals. But I saw something. It's not outside anymore. Rachel thinks I'm making it up. I'm not. Last night, it knocked from inside the wall." For a long time, no one said anything. Then came the silence of realization, that they had been standing beside that wall for over a decade, that the truth had waited inches away. The forensic team removed more of the paneling, uncovering the full cavity. Nothing else was found inside. No signs of struggle, no blood. But above the opening, etched into the wood in deep knife lines, were 3 short vertical marks. A silent echo of the scratches found on the trail marker 13 years prior. The diary was sealed and sent for testing. The ink held traces of iron oxide, oxidized from age, but still recoverable. It was genuine. Amanda had written those words, and they were her last. Rachel was never heard from again. Amanda's remains were never recovered, and the knocking, whatever it meant, stopped that summer. Investigators declared the discovery material evidence of abduction. But without bodies, without confession, and without any known suspect, there would be no arrest, no trial, Just words, just echoes. Mark Whitaker, now 58, received the diary by courier. He opened it on his porch, read each page in silence. Then, quietly, he did something he hadn't done in 13 years. He locked the door behind him. The cottage has since been sold again, this time to a retired couple who say they don't mind its history. They've remodeled the back bedroom, tore down the walls, repainted everything. But when asked by a local paper how they chose the house, the new owner gave a strange reply. "We didn't pick it. It was waiting." Reflection and legacy. The Whitaker case remains open, but no longer silent. Amanda's diary now rests in a climate-controlled evidence vault, marked with a red tag, recovered after 13 years. The floorboard scratches were copied and archived. The wall cavity was photographed in high resolution. Each detail, finally seen. But no charges were filed, no arrests made. There was no villain to confront, only a vanished truth, and the echo of warnings no one believed. Still, the case left behind a lesson, one too quiet for headlines, too haunting for courtroom arguments. Sometimes the clues don't point forward, they point backward. Home. Final CTA. Share this story. Someone, somewhere, knows what the knocking meant. Someone heard it too, and someone still remembers.